mean, coming back to that and all that social justice stuff, and I do want to talk to you about the Hollywood.
The Hollywood Food Coalition.
Yes. And yes. I think that ties quite nicely in with the social justice stuff on that map. But you had a great part in that episode, and you spent most of it opposite Bradley Whitford and Alison Janney.
All of it, yes. I only had 2 scenes, yes. And both of them are dreamy. I mean, dreamy actors, wonderful actors, and they couldn't be sweeter in person. I really enjoyed getting to know both of them. You know, it's funny, if you're a guest star, and I've been a regular on shows, and I always, in those times when I've been a regular, I always try and remember what it's like to be a guest on a show. You don't know anybody, you know, it can be overwhelming. You always want to go out of your way to make a guest feel at home and welcomed, and I think that's really, really, really important. They certainly made me feel that way, and 9 times out of 10, that is what happens. I just did a show called Station 19, which is kind of a spin-off of Grey's Anatomy, and 3 of the younger cast members especially couldn't have been sweeter. Just so lovely and welcoming and nice, and makes a big difference if you're an itinerant actor bopping around from set to set.
Because you've been on The Mentalist as well, and just while we're talking about Trek, there's a lot of Star Trek actors being on The Mentalist.
Well, there are a lot of Star Trek actors, so yes.
And there's a lot of Star Trek references on The Mentalist. And then Bruno, when he finished, Bruno Heller, when he finished The Mentalist, he done Gotham, which is the Batman prequel. And there was Star Trek references and Star Trek actors in that. So, I mean, the question, I mean, has to be someone involved in those 2 shows, whether it's Bruno or someone else that's a Star Trek fan.
Could be. I don't know. I didn't watch The Mentalist. I only watched the episode I was in, so I don't know much about that show, and I haven't watched Gotham. So
Gotham's worth a watch. It's well worth a watch.
I try and keep a rein on the amount of television I watch. Although during COVID, I've watched far more television than I'm used to, because I really do like to read. And it can be very easy to kind of get all your reading time sucked away by TV. So I probably most shows I'm cognizant that they exist, but I'm not familiar with them terribly well.
Well, JJ's going to hate me because I go on about it every week at the moment. For All Mankind on Apple TV. I
did watch Schitt's Creek.
Oh, great. Love that.
Which I thought was charming as shit. And I watched Fleabag recently, which was fucking great. But I'm always years behind in terms of, and the same way with movies. It's like I still haven't seen the Oscar winners for like, a decade probably. So I don't even, why am I in this business? I wanted to be a writer. I actually went to college. I went to I only applied to girls' schools. That was my way of, figuring I've got to I was like, 18 years old, and I couldn't even look at myself. I couldn't imagine a girl wanting to look at me. So I thought I need all the help I can get. I'm only going to apply to you wouldn't necessarily get these references. But in the States, it's like Vassar, Smith, Wesleyan, Bennington. It was like, I care about the female to male ratio, first and foremost. A secondary concern was that they had good writing teachers, and a tertiary concern was that they didn't have grades. So I ended up going to Bennington College, which was a small liberal arts school, and I got to study with some really amazing writers, including Bernard Malamud, who's in my opinion, one of the greatest post-war writers that America produced. But at the age of 19, studying with one of the greatest writers that America's produced is like, talk about limp dick syndrome. It was like, I'm going to become an actor. So that kind of put the kibosh on my writing career. Always been a big reader, but that was the, inadvertently a mistake of mine to study with the greats at too young an age.
It's a bit like imposter syndrome sort of thing, where you're like...
Totally. Yeah, if I'd been like 19 and I studied with Olivier, and Olivier was like, to be an actor, you must... I'd have been like, no, fuck that, I'm not going to...
No.
So where did you learn to act then?
Say what?
Where did you learn to act?
I started acting when I was a kid. In the 5th grade, we had moved from Louisiana to Connecticut. with a brief stop in between in Manhattan. I had a thick Southern accent, I talk like this. And needless to say, the Northern children tried to beat that out of me. But I did not feel like I was a particularly popular child, but I was always a reader. So in the 5th grade, they kind of had a form of a mandatory audition for the class play. Everybody had to read for parts because everybody was going to play something. And it was A Christmas Carol. And I was the only one who could pick up the script and read with any kind of authority. It's like, at least I didn't stumble over the fucking words. So I got cast as Scrooge. And for this brief, halcyon moment in my life, I was popular. Of course, it all ended as soon as the play was over. But that was the impetus. I turned to my parents and said, I want to be an actor. Even in the 5th grade, I thought, this is how I'm going to get laid eventually. And who knows, perhaps people will buy me drinks in pubs sometime down the road. My parents it worked. My parents very graciously sent me to, in Manhattan, I studied with a couple of terrific acting teachers, Ed and Dorothy Bryce, you would not know. And I just fell in love with it. And so it was always between writing and acting. I didn't really think, because I was like, kind of like a bulbous nosed, pimply faced kid. I thought, it's probably not going to happen for me there. So I thought writing was more likely to be where, but there's always room for a little character actor here and there. And I did love it. I always loved it. So I pursued it pretty much professionally from the time I was 21. And, you scrape by. I was an acting teacher. I ran a theater company devoted to adapting fiction for the stage, which still exists. I was a peripatetic theater actor, and then I moved to LA in 1994 and devoted myself exclusively to film and TV. So that's pretty much.
So you mentioned, you said about character actor. There's always a need for a character actor. Now, obviously, I've not watched as many things as Gregor, so my knowledge of your good self is limited to Stargate, The Orville, and obviously Star Trek. But
you don't know my oeuvre?
Oh no!
My oeuvre?
I am the simpleton of the show, my dear. He's the intelligent one. I'm just the one that sits and looks pretty.
I see.
So, I see. Dr. Phlox for me is just brilliant. You bring something to that which is what makes Enterprise watchable for me in the early seasons. Especially when you
forward through all the scenes I'm not in. I get
pretty much.
That's the way I did it too.
Right, I'm just going to stop before this goes too far, because in the interest of full disclosure, there's a Twitter account called Dr. Phlox's Fourth Wife, and it's JJ. I think it's JJ. So
no, I know her very well.
Yes, our mutual friend. Yes, our mutual friend, Brooke Perez.
Yes,
I think.
Brooke Perez.
Yes. Oh, what a lovely person.
Shout out to Brooke. I know.
Yes. We'll put a tagline in the show notes, so that if you want to follow.
Brooke only sees my good side. She has no idea about what a dark and twisted character I really am.
Actually, see, that segue actually brings us nicely onto the fact that, you mentioned that you're getting paid for this earlier on. Well, I don't think we should, because we're kind of like sloppy fourth as far as your podcast is, because prior to this, you've been on I Quit Star Trek Pod, I believe.
I'm a slut. I'm a slut.
Yeah, that's your podcast slut. I didn't want to say it, but there you go.
Promiscuous Star Trek actor. On the other hand, I don't get any money. The reason one, I'm just, why the fuck not? Why the fuck wouldn't I? I mean, you guys bought me a house, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, until I had Star Trek, I was making a nice living. I was doing okay, but that radically changed my life. And to be able to travel the world and, be able to crash into people's conversations with the expectation that not only will they allow me to do it, but they will buy me a drink. I mean, what a wonderful gift. So absolutely, I'll always do podcasts. But it also gives me an opportunity to kind of talk a bit about what I do above and beyond acting, which is the work I do with the Hollywood Food Coalition and I don't want to call it social activism, because although I'm very political, I am not a politician, and I'm not, the organization I work for is not itself political. We work to address issues of food insecurity, and we do it in a lot of different ways. One, we feed everybody who wants a hot, good 5-course meal knocks on our door every night, all comers, no questions asked, no barriers to entrance, no religious test. We try and make sure that those people who get a good meal are also given access to whatever we can provide by way of emergency services. Tents, sleeping bags, bus passes, laundry vouchers, clothing, shoes, advice. We try and connect them to other social service organizations. And in addition, we also, see how I segued right into this? I wasn't even going to let you guys I was just going to like grab it. I just grabbed it. And the other thing we do is we rescue a lot of food. So we opened a second facility, and all the food we rescue from all over the city of Los Angeles lands there, and we share it with other not-for-profits. And the premise is that a lot of great not-for-profits do really, really cool things, working with folks who have drug and alcohol issues, working with street kids, working with single mothers who have escaped from abusive situations. What they don't always have is really good, robust food programs. And we kind of say, you know what, if you're going to get up in the morning and you're going to go to class, or you're going to try and figure out how to kind of get your life back, you kind of have to make sure that those people get a good meal. At least one every day, if not 2 or 3, you know, because we've all been there. When you're hungry, how well do you concentrate? You know, how much energy do you bring to the table? You got to start from a foundation. So we kind of use food, in essence, as a medium through which we can help support social services. And in that sense, I consider us a social justice organization, but it is obviously not specifically political in nature. That's the Hollywood Food Coalition. I will say no more about it, but it's a huge part of my life. I'm the president of the board. My wife is in charge of many aspects of food rescue. We're in essence serving around 650,000 meals a year, both in our own home kitchen and more broadly by providing food to these other organizations. Anyway, big part of my life, big part of what I do.
To be honest with you, you can talk about it as much as you want, actually, to be honest, because in a sort of a Star Trek-y connection way, Gene Roddenberry's vision of Star Trek was what humanity could be, what it could achieve if it were, you know, if it got rid of the shackles of everything that holds us down right now, and being able to help everybody like the way the Hollywood Food Coalition does in that way is a great example of the kind of things that we all need to do. And if we all did these things, we wouldn't have the problems that. You know what I find interesting, and it lifts me and it gives me hope in dark times. And we've been through very, very dark time in American history. I think the last 4 years might be one of the darkest periods in American history. But one of the things that I come away with is that almost everybody I meet is doing something. Even people who I might have strong political disagreements with, they are in their own way trying to give back to their community. Now, sometimes I think those efforts become so darkly politicized, they become pernicious. That's my own opinion. But most people are looking for ways to help and get involved in their community. Most people are trying. Sometimes what I think we don't do quite well enough yet is we don't encourage and help foster in people that little volunteeristic flame and help it grow, you know? Most of us want to do something. I think a lot of what we need in this world is to kind of find that impetus that people have to help and nurture it and encourage it and figure out ways to allow it to bloom, you know? Do you want to teach kids to read? Do you want to volunteer in the prison system? Do you want to work on specifically social justice issues or on, you know, in my instance, for whatever reason, I'm particularly drawn towards issues revolving around poverty. Whatever it is that animates you, there are ways to get involved in your community. There are any number of groups that exist that are fighting the fight that you want to participate in fighting. You know, and I just kind of like in a macro way, above and beyond what I do, I always like to just kind of say, do some Googling, do some phone calling, find out who's doing shit that interests you and pitch in. And you will find a whole community of really cool people that will become your life buddies, because you're all invested in the same passion. Many, many people do that. And my wife is always saying, you make it sound like, you know, you've found fire. It's like, oh, fire, everybody should do this. It for me has been an ever more important part of my life the older I've gotten, figuring out how to give back, and it animates me. So I tend to talk about it a lot.
There's there's a public health expert here in Scotland, Professor Harry Burns, and he's done a lot of studies. He's professor, so he's highly regarded to begin with. But he's had a lot of published papers, and he's done a lot of studies on humans' needs. And we live in a system now, whether it's a socialist system or a communist system or a capitalist system, it's actually inversed, whereby we use food, shelter and warmth as the motivator. We have that at the top of the triangle, so to speak. And we expect everyone at the bottom of the triangle to climb the triangle to this pinnacle of achieving self-sufficiency in terms of food, shelter.
Yeah, well, there's Maslow's needs, and a lot of the hierarchy that basically says you've got to start by making sure that people have, something to eat, a place to sleep.
Yes.
You're never going to get people emotionally healthy or intellectually healthy until you make sure that their physical emergency needs are taken care of.
Yeah.
We really believe that as you begin to climb that ladder, though, that's when, for somebody who may be taking drugs, you try and get them into a treatment program. You try and find, job training for them. You try and make sure that they can belong to a community where they feel like they're part of something. Those are the deepest human needs we have. The need for connection, mental health, and spiritual well-being. You don't get it if you're not fucking eating.
Yeah.
And you don't get it if you're living on the street.
You also make poor decisions. And this is Harry Burns. This is what Harry Burns has done a lot of study on. If you take all that away, people make poor decisions.
Yeah.
It's a major step in getting, what you're doing by making sure people are getting the right nutrition.
No kid pops out of the womb, like with a stamp on his head saying doomed to fail, doomed to starve, doomed to fuck up. It's the world we live in, unfortunately, starts kicking kids in the teeth in a lot of ways from a very, very early age. I have a friend of mine who teaches in the LA public school system. There are 40 kids in his class, and they range across all socioeconomic backgrounds. And they have all sorts of different kinds of behavioral and learning issues, family problems. There's no way in God's green earth the public school system, as it is currently constituted, can grapple with these kids' needs. So we graduate a lot of kids from our public school system here in America that are not capable of fitting into our workforce. They certainly are not able to make more than minimum wage. And in cities in America, minimum wage ain't going to get you fucking bupkis. It ain't going to buy you an apartment. So surprise, surprise, they end up in the prisons or on the streets. That's not the kid. That's us. That's us not valuing, human life. So anyway, don't get me started because I get pretty animated about this shit.
Oh, that's it. That's a green flag for Gregor there. He's going to throw. He's going to throw
you
gasoline
guys,
on that.
God bless Scotland. I mean, and I know that there are many of y'all that would just as soon pull away from Great Britain, and I totally get it because you guys have fought the good fight in terms of honoring the principles of progressivism in the teeth of a retrenchment. And I'm applaud that. I applaud a lot of what Northern Europe, specifically in the Scandinavian countries, have achieved. To a certain extent, that's a little more feasible because it is not quite as racism is not quite as problematic. We are such a crazy quilt of ethnicities that it is very easy for people on the right who do not want to see their purse shrink by a single coin. It's very easy for them to incite middle class and lower middle class people to blame poorer people for their problems. There was something in the news, months and months ago. I just broke my heart. This poor, toothless white guy in Florida was basically refusing free dental care because it was coming from a program that was also providing free dental care for black people. And it was basically saying, I don't want a goddamn welfare. I'm not taking no welfare. Those people don't deserve it. It's like you would rather live your life toothless than see the guy next to you that you don't like because he's a different color than you get the same service that you would get.
We have this argument when it comes to universal basic income, which they have in Finland.
Yeah.
And it works. There isn't a metric that they can measure that shows that it fails. No. And every other rightish leaning country, the minute it's spoken about, it's, oh, well, why will people go to their work in the morning? Well, we have the evidence that it works. There's more innovation, there's more entrepreneurialism, and far less inequality in Finland than there is in the UK or the US.
Yeah, no, I know it's, but you know, the people who I think there are a bajillion reasons rooted in what's, you know, unfortunately corrosive in the human spirit. For all that's wonderful in the human spirit, there is still that fuck, flee, fight, primeval, primitive, goddamn brain that's basically, you know, protect your fucking turf, protect your tribe. There's a wonderful book called The Righteous Mind by a guy named Jonathan Haidt, and in it he essentially argues that the real value line that makes it difficult for people on the right and people on the left to come together is that the anthropological history of the world suggests that people, when they form tribal associations, think in two ways. Some people think that the tribe has to close ranks and anybody outside the tribe is a threat to the tribe. Other tribes thought the only way our tribe can survive is to expand and bring new people in. And that this was the fundamental dividing line still in the way we think about the world. And I think that makes a lot of sense when you talk to people about how they view politics.
In that particular sort of example of the tribal system, as you mentioned, was I think was played out really well, and I think was a very good display in The Walking Dead, because they have that sort of that tribal, when they form their little groups, they form those little tribal you know, social groups, and exactly that happens. You know, there's the groups that sort of, you know, stick together and keep small, and then there's there's Rick's group, which sort of like welcomes people in and grows and stuff like that. So that's a good example.
And you look at human history, and it's really difficult to not kind of want to turn around to folks who are more, you know, close the circle and say the reason we survived, and to the extent we have flourished, is because you guys lost. You know, nation states evolved because small tribes got together and said, we should get bigger. You know, the only way we're going to be able to defend ourselves is to grow more food and build bigger communities and engage in a more vociferous and vigorous collaborative effort to provide. It's like, as you said about Finland, it has demonstrably worked better than your way of visiting, you know, life as a constant Manichaean fight for survival against everybody fucking else.
I mean,
I don't think. Sorry, JJ, you go.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest problems with humanity working in a way that would be beneficial for everybody is perspective. For example, if I was to draw a number on the table in front of me, say I would draw a 6. But if you were you know, sat at the other side of me, you would see a 9. So that is the biggest problem. And like you say, different countries doing different things different ways, and different people doing different things in different ways. We're going to think you're wrong, but you could think I'm wrong. And as long as we have that, we base our decisions on our own perspective, I think, you know, we'll always have that sort of those issues. And
there's another book I quite liked, was very interesting, was called The Big Sort, I think it was his title, and he basically argued, this is in relationship to America, but I think this is that there is some truth to this on a global perspective, that in periods of time when progressivism has advanced, it's usually come about because there has been a pronounced intermingling of populations. And he argues that in a way, if we could treat America as if it was a blanket and we can toss everybody up in the air every, you know, like 7 years, so that they all land in a different place, and they would have to reorient themselves in ways that could, you know, be eye-opening. I do sometimes kind of feel like, you know, one of the things that happened after, and you know, this is arguable, but particularly in 2008, is that with everybody kind of, you know, the housing market underwater, it kind of put the kibosh on a lot of people moving. You know, that's begun to shift and change, but some of the you know, stuck in the mudness that happened in the American economy, I think helped to perpetuate some of the more nativist impulses too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's some of the the deeper underlying reasons for what's happened in America in the last 5 or 6 years. As an outsider who's relatively interested in politics, there's a couple of things that I've seen over the last 40 years. The way American elections are conducted, the TV adverts, the finance, and I think that was probably a bigger contributing factor to what's happened the last 5 or 6 years. I mean, I would watch some stuff and go, how is that an issue? That's not even a political issue. That's just tribalism.
I mean, the biggest thing that happened to me, and Lyndon Johnson said this in 1964 with the passage of the Civil Rights Act, is we always had this very peculiar, I mean, race in America is such a driver of everything. There was always this really strange marriage between the progressive left, the Democratic Party, and the conservative right in the Democratic Party. And there was a devil's compact under Roosevelt. Roosevelt basically said, we're going to rebuild the South. We're going to build dams. We're going to electrify you. We're going to bring you back up into, because it was an incredibly backward part of our country. The poverty rate was through the roof. We're going to bring you into the country, and we ask for you to support these, extremely expensive initiatives. And the Southern Republicans, Southern Democrats at the time said, sure, but in return, leave us the fuck alone when it comes to our racial codes. We are going to continue to lynch black people. We're going to continue to imprison black people. And the Democratic left said, okay. And in 1964, black people said, enough is fucking enough. We had the civil rights marches, and the Civil Rights Act passed, and Lyndon Johnson essentially said, this is going to break the Democratic Party. And the Republican Party is going to come in, and they're going to get in bed with the racists, and now they're going to be in power for the next 2 generations. And that's what happened. From 1968 until today, the Republican Party has essentially had much more political dominance because they've been able to form this kind of devil's alliance between the racist right, the fundamentalist religious right, which, and frankly, there's a lot of racism in the fundamentalist movement, and the corporatist part of the Republican Party. It's become, and it's extremely well financed by the corporatists. As you say, they have made it very difficult to engage. We don't have public financing elections. We have dark money flooding in, and that's a choice. But the animating impulse is race.
I mean, I think there's been an opportunity missed, and I'll just state my political views here. I am neither left nor right. I do not believe in a monetary system. I go way beyond that. And before anybody
clearly, you are not paying me. I understand that.
I go way beyond.
I know. You're going to send me. What are you going to send me? You're going to send me something along the barter system. You're going to send me chocolates, coconuts. What are you going to send me?
Well, Jacques Fresco, the Venus Project. Jacques Fresco is probably the closest to where I think we need to do. I don't think realistically, we're not going to do away. We can't put the genie back in the bottle, but it needs some sort of major adjustment. Otherwise, we're not going to be here in 100 years' time. Simple as that. But both the Democrats and here in the UK with the Labour Party, there has been growing unrest. There has been a growing movement to the left, a much more fundamental movement to the left in those parties. But the people that run those parties, who had the chance to get the 30 to 40% of people who don't vote, to get them out the door and making the vote, missed it because the Labour Party contrived against their own leader, Jeremy Corbyn, and the Democrats twice made it their mission to make sure Bernie Sanders never got anywhere near the nomination.
I'm going to push back at that. I won't speak to English politics because I'm certainly not as knowledgeable as you are. But in America, the problem is that you cannot have a governing coalition if you don't find a way to meld the center right and the left. What I think Joe Biden has done is he's taken a lot of left-wing policies and he's actually figured out a way to use moderate rhetoric to bring a coalition together. And that's not something that Bernie could have achieved. Bernie lost because a lot of Democrats didn't want Bernie. And that wasn't because that they necessarily were, intentionally pushed off the Bernie dime by evil forces. It's because they didn't believe that Bernie could win, and they didn't believe that Bernie could effectively govern. I mean,
do you think Biden would have won if it hadn't been for COVID?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's one of those counterfactuals. You don't know what might have come up as the one thing you can say about Trump is Trump had a nose for dog shit. So if it hadn't been COVID, you don't know what dog shit Trump might have stepped in. I don't know. I mean, I think it would have been fucking close, but that's the one thing that you know, and you mentioned Rupert Murdoch at the top of it. If there's another thing that has changed in the last 50 or so years, it's the fragmentation of media and the nature of the growth of these propagandistic networks that are essentially uncontrolled. And I'm a free speech guy, but at the same time, in America, once the FCC had something called the Fairness Doctrine, and it really wouldn't allow people who, in essence, were given access to the public airwaves to say whatever the fuck they wanted. We now have propaganda channels where people are essentially, you know, I mean, a good portion of the American population believes this past election was fraudulent. And in large part, that's because propaganda channels in America, Rupert Murdoch, obviously, you know, leading the charge, have parroted those claims. I don't know. I mean, if Goebbels has the power to blah, 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 in perpetuity, the fuck do you do? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that.
This is why I hide from. I very rarely watch news. I mean, I used to watch it religiously.
But you can't hide because we're going to be underwater. You know, you will be drowning and you'll be saying, oh, I didn't see that coming. I mean, I'm extremely political, but I have to say, I do respond to people who kind of feel like they can avert their eyes. It's like, it's coming for all of us.
I mean,